Alright guys, today's video is somewhat important one, very important one in fact, because I am going to uncover the damage formula in this game. So when I say the damage formula, what I mean is that whenever you perform an action, you will notice there's going to be a number next to your action, and that is going to basically indicate a power of how strong your action is. Regardless, for example, if it's a serve, if it's a receive, if it's a block, if it's a spike, there will always be a number next to it. And you can actually calculate that number exactly out by using the formula which I'm going to show you guys. Okay, so that's kind of why today's video is going to be very important, but it's also going to be somewhat technical. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to tell you guys exactly what the formula is and what impact it's going to make, and then at the end of the video I'm just going to add in loads of clips of how I done my testing to actually come up with those formulas. Okay, so if you don't really care about the nerdy part, then you can just watch the first half of the video and then just stop it there. So at least you know how to take advantage of the damage formula in order to maximize your score. However, if you do actually want to validate and just check, exactly what I've done and how did I come to this conclusion, then you can watch the second half of this video as well. Okay, now first of all, I just want to talk about what does that higher number actually mean. This part I'm not actually 100% sure. Okay, even though I can actually replicate almost 100% the number that's going to be appearing next to action, what I am not so sure is that what exactly does a higher number actually mean. In my own theory, which I can't really validate because it's probability based, but my own theory is that the higher the number, or maybe the higher the difference between your number and the opponent's number, is basically going to be increasing the likelihood of you doing perfect or normal or bad action. Well, obviously a higher chance of doing perfect action if your number is higher, as opposed to if a lower number, then you may be performing more bad actions. And perfect, normal, or bad doesn't actually have any influence on the score itself. The way I actually look at it is the higher the score, it gives you a higher chance of perfect, and when you actually have a perfect, it gives you a higher chance of you actually winning that point. Okay, and then the perfect, normal, bad action themselves, they can also be transferred to the next action. You guys probably already know this, but for example, if you do a perfect receive, your next set is almost certainly going to be perfect or normal. It almost never would be bad. And likewise, if your set is perfect, your spike is guaranteed to be perfect because the spike actually copies the action of the set. So if your set is going to be a bad one, your spike will guarantee to be a bad one. And obviously a perfect spike is going to have a much higher chance than a bad spike. Okay, so that's basically the way I calculate, well, the way I serial graph everything. But like I said, only the first half, the actual damage calculation, I can actually replicate that 100%, and that's kind of what I'm very sure about that in this video, which I'm going to show you guys exactly how they are reached to that conclusion and what that formula is. But then the second half of how that actually translates to the probability of bad, normal, perfect, that part is obviously probability based. There's no way for me to actually validate that. So unfortunately, you just have to take a guess on that. And like I said, my theory is going to be the higher the number, the higher chance of you getting a perfect action, and therefore the higher chance of you actually getting that point. Okay, so that's a bit of an intro. What exactly is going to be the formula? So the formula, you can see there are a bunch of different stats there, and to be honest, they're all going to be useful to some extent, but the formula itself is going to look something like this. There is going to be a number 2. I don't actually know whether this number will change. It just so happens every single I test it, the number 2 seems to be the right multiplier in my formula, and I'll show you at the end of the video again when I do of the testing. But for some reason, it just always seem to be a scaling factor of 2 in front of it. I don't know whether this could potentially change based on some other factor, or maybe this is actually random, but 2 is just the most likely outcome. But I have literally tested this like 10 different times, and it always seems to be a multiplier of 2 in front of it. Okay, and then the next thing you're going to multiply that by is going to be the skill multiplier. And by the skill multiplier, what I basically mean is that when you take an action, regardless whether it's a block or a serve or whatever, there's going to be a number next to it. Okay, so for example, all covers ultimate attack is going to be a jump serve depending equal to 260% of his serve stats. Okay, so that is basically the number you'll be plugging into this formula. So that's going to be the skill multiplier. Then the next one is going to be the total stats. So that's obviously it's going to be the stat for the corresponding action. You can probably already tell here this one says, for example, serve stats, right? So that is basically going to be be the stats. Now, when I talk about the stats, what I mean is both, first of all, the ones that will be coming from the character itself. So, for example, if you take a look at the surf, you can see there's two numbers here. The black one is basically the base number from the character itself. Then the green ones, the additional coming from your memory, coming from your potential, etc. You'll be adding them up both together. All right. So for Okawa, you can see my self stats for Okawa himself is going to be 4030. However, that's not it. There's actually going to be more things you're going to be adding on, which is not actually on the character page. Very basic example, it's going to be from your team cheering score. For example, here, you will see some additional number coming out here as well. So for example, if I was to calculate the damage for my all-cover serve, I will have to add in this an extra 195 to his serve stats as well. And then also depending on of your school speciality as well. For example, obviously, I don't think anything actually increased serve, but let's say if I was actually trying to calculate like a quick spike or power spike, and I happen to have a Karasuno as well, then this would also be increased. And likewise, if the lineup speciality actually counters the opponent, that would also be increased in terms of your stats as well. Okay, so that is something. Actually, no, for the lineup speciality, it might be a 30% power boost to the very end rather than the individual stats. So for the lineup speciality, this is going to be an extra 30%, I believe, after you finish the whole formula. But for the likes of your school bond, that will just be individual stats. So it will just be added on to whatever stats you want to add on for the corresponding one. Okay, so that's basically the total stats. Then the next thing is going to be attack and defense technique. This is going to be a pretty simple one because that's actually been called out as one of the stats. So for example, if I just check my Okawa, because it's my first character, well, you can see if I click on stats, there's going to be this attack technique, okay? For vast majority of character, it might be for all the character, the base is going to be 0%. However, with your potential or maybe school bound, for example, you have in Narizaki, you can further increase that. And that's going to be some additional multiplier or additional component of this formula. And then the last one is going to be the crit based one. And this one is going to be quite simple. If you didn't crit, then you can ignore this last part completely. If you did crit, however, it will be multiplying that by your crit damage. However, for the crit damage one, this one is not so obvious because right now, first of all, for crit, for those of you guys who do not know, crit in this game is actually split into offensive action and also defensive action. So if you're performing offensive actions, for example, quick attack, power attack, set or serve, your crit rate is going to be awareness and your crit damage is going to be strength. However, if you're performing defensive actions such as receive, block, or save, then your crit rate is going to be reflex and your crit damage is going to be spirit. Now, even though here right now you see the crit damage, the base level seems to be 0% on every single character. That's not actually true because in this game there's a default crit value of actually 50%. So that's kind of why there's actually a baseline of 150 already. So if I take a look at my all-color game, you can see here right now I have my strength increased by 46.4%. What that basically means is that I will be multiplying my whatever final formula or damage score by an additional 1.464. That's not actually right because there's like I said, already a baseline of 150 inside. So actually you'll be multiplying that by 196.4 rather than 146.4. Okay, you just have to add an extra 50 to this crit damage. It's not obvious, but I can validate this from off the testing I've done. Once again, if you want to cross check that, then watch till the end of my video. Okay, but that is basically the damage formula in a nutshell. So what does that damage formula actually mean? Like I said, my theory is that the higher the number, it's going to give you a higher chance of actually getting your perfect actions and therefore actually winning the point. So you want to maximize this damage as much as possible. And knowing this formula, you actually know which substats you want to concentrate on. And that's actually going to be very important when you actually plan your potential. Now, a lot of people have been asking me, what is the best potential substat I want for each of the character? It's actually really hard for me to give you one blanket answer because it's going to be different for every single character depending on their kit and also to some extent depending on what team you'll be playing. Okay, so I'll give you an example here. So if we just take a look at Okawa's kit, okay, you might be thinking for vast majority of character, if I don't add any potential, it's going to be 100% times 100% times 100%, but that's not actually right because if we actually take Okawa as an example, right, what does Okawa already have from his thing? So he has some kind of crit rate, but I'm going to ignore that, okay? Because crit rate is only going to be probability based, so I don't care. However, if I take a look at his skill 2, he's going to increase the strength of all of the power type player on your side by 20%. So what that means is that he already, because he is a power attack label character, you're going to already get an extra 20% just from his kit. And same thing, when you actually perform his ultimate attack, he is also going to further increase his strength by another 20%. So what that basically means is rather than starting off with 100% times 100% times 150, which is the base, you already have an extra 40 crit damage built into your version 4 cover. So that actually means that you will be increasing that to 190. And once again, that is actually going to change again if you actually happen to have him as skill resonance 2. Because if you actually have him as skill resonance 2, you'll be increasing your surf stat by an additional 18% as well. So now all of a sudden, his damage multiplier would look something like this: 118 times 100 times 190. And obviously, that is actually going to change the way you want to add potential. And the reason why it's going to change is because, for example, if I assume I have an extra 10%, I can add onto any of my stats, right? If I add it onto my strengths, what's that going to happen is that it will change my crit damage from 190 to 200. So even though it's an additional 10%, if you actually think of a proportional out of that, it's only a 10% extra out of that 190. So it's actually going to be slightly different because you are not actually increasing by 10%. If I add 10% to my attack or defense technique, that's an actual 10% extra to my whole power. However, if I add extra 10% onto my stats, which is already close to 200, actually I'm not adding 10%. I'm adding 10% out of 200, which is actually only going to be a 5% increase. So vast majority of the time, I see a lot of people make this mistake, is that they would be thinking, oh, this character seems to be naturally tending towards strength or crit rate because he already have loads of crit rate or crit damage in their care. So therefore, I should build my character with even higher crit damage or crit rate. That's actually completely the opposite way around. You actually want to spread out all of your substats to different components of this formula to actually increase them all bit by bit, because that way when you actually multiply them together, it's actually going to be a lot more powerful, and therefore you actually get a higher number overall. Okay, if you are going to put into something which is already very high just from the character's base kit, what's going to happen is you're actually going to dilute how much additional incremental value you're going to get out of that number. Okay, so that's kind of why in those cases you probably actually want to instead put in that extra 10%, just an example, right? 10% rather than into crit damage, you actually want to put it into a surf stats or maybe in attack technique instead, right? And that's going to be the case for your version 4 cover without any dupes. However, at dupe 2, you don't really want to put it on surf stats either, because a 10% here is going to mean a lot less than a 10% in attack technique. Then all of a sudden, attack technique is going to be the substats you want, okay? And this is just a very simple example. I'm literally just adding 2 extra dupes to a character, and you can already see the way I need to build that character is going to change slightly different. Now think about you have all of your other teammates as well, okay? Maybe school bond as well. That is actually going to change a lot. And then also for your potential stats, also for your memories, they would also going to have an impact in terms of which one of your stats may already be very high, and therefore you're going to dilute the effect. And that's kind of why you don't really see me doing like a best recommended potential stats for every single character, because in my opinion, rather than teaching you guys that, which is going to change depending on your own situation, your own team building, it's actually going to be a lot more better, in my opinion, to actually teach you guys about this damage formula so that you guys know exactly what you want to build for your specific team, okay, or your specific character combination, okay? There's actually one other thing which is not part of the damage formula, but it's worth pointing out because it's contributing to the final score. But basically, some characters, they have skills, such as, for example, ultimate skill resonance 2. You will see basically it says this spike gains additional bonus power equal to 60% of his quick attack stats. And basically, this is not actually part of the damage formula in the sense that this is just an additional bonus power. So this is just going to be added to the very end after you've done all of your multiplication of your crit multiplier, your attack technique multiplier, etc. So that's kind of why, even though this says 60%, which looks very high, if you actually put this inside the damage formula, the number will be a lot lower, because like I said, this is addition. So this is a number added to the end of the damage formula rather than being plugged in inside the damage formula. So whatever stats here or whatever this bonus is not going to be multiplied by any crit multiplier, it's not going to be multiplied by any skill multiplier, it's not going to be multiplied by any attack technique multiplier, etc. Okay, now obviously you can still make the most out of this, because for example, if you actually have awesome, then potentially you actually want to build it with a higher quick attack stat, because obviously quick attack stats will basically be able to help him to contribute more both inside the damage formula and also for this bonus power outside of damage formula. However, I just want to point out, because this, I know some people may also get confused by this, it's also a very another simple example. It's going to be in the potentials. If I go to the potential for the setting, for example, for this one, what you can see is that the two-piece effect increases the set stat by 15%. So basically, because this actually increases the stat itself, this will be multiplied by everything else in the damage formula. However, the four-piece effect is going to be an additional power at the end of the damage formula, which is equivalent to 15% of the set stat. So basically, this four-piece effect is not going to be multiplied any further by attack technique or any other modifier, etc. So this 15% is actually going to be a lot less than the 15% from the two-piece effect. Okay, so that's also something you want to bear in mind. It can be a bit tricky. You just have to be very careful when you actually read the skill description to know whether this was going to be under any other modifier, or it's just going to be a one-off bonus calculation at the end of the damage formula. Okay, but yeah, this is basically everything I want you guys to take away from this video. Now it's going to be moving on to the more nerdy part of the actual, how did I come to conclusion with all of my multipliers and also of my damage formula, etc. So if you're more of a casual player, then obviously you can stop the video now, and hopefully this was helpful to you guys. But for those of you guys who are a bit more hardcore, I'll get on to the testing now. Now here's the nerdy part for those of you who want to see the actual testing and how they'll come up with this formula. So first of all, I'm using Goshki for the comparison, and you can see I already took out his potential and memory just so it's easy for me to see the difference. And you can see here right now he has a total power attack of 1528. Okay, and if I actually break down into stats info, you can see first of all I didn't put in any extra into strength, and there's nothing into attack technique. Okay, so if I'm actually plugging this into my damage formula, is very simple. It's just going to be 2 times the number of my total power attack stats. However, remember, it's not just the one from the character. The character was 1528. However, I also have an additional 155 from the Turing squad. Okay, so if I just plug in those two numbers, 1528 plus what was it? 155. Right, so this is actually my total power stats, okay? And if I times that by 2, what you're going to see is that my total, my damage multiplier, assuming if I do a normal attack, so 100% scaling, it's going to be 3366, okay? So now if I actually jump into where I've done an action, here, right? So if I actually see here, first of all, my all cover done the receive, so my tenders actually do one setting, and this is also going to be important because later on I also have the exact same clip where my all cover done the set, and the set number is different. However, you're going to see the spike number is going to be exactly identical, and that just shows whatever action performed beforehand has nothing to do with the action going on right now. What is only going to be translated from the action before is whether it's a perfect, whether it's a normal, or whether it's a bad. However, the actual numerical value is not actually going to translate. Okay, so now you can see Goshki is going to do an ult, and that's actually 7576. Obviously, this is higher than this number I have because 3366, that's actually a normal attack. Okay, so if I actually take a look at the ult multiplier for Goshki, it's actually 225. So I actually need to do times this by 2.25. And then what you're going to see is 7573.5. Okay, obviously there's going to be a small discrepancy. There's only a margin of like 2 or 3, 2.5 to be exact. That's probably just down to rounding, I think. So that's kind of what, to me, this is actually almost like 100% replicate of this correct number multiplier for this ultimate attack. Okay, and now in fact for the exact same rally, they actually meant to return. And now I actually perform normal attack. And guess what? Take a look at my number, 3366. This is exactly twice the total power attack stat for my Goshki, okay? And this just shows the damage formula is going to be correct in this case, in very simple case, where the only thing that's going to influence it is going to be the total stats and also the skill multiplier, okay? And remember, that was when my tender was setting. Now, if I actually scroll to my next gameplay, I think here, no, sorry, that's not the right one. It's my very last one. Here, what you can see here, my all color is actually going to do the set. And what's going to be number? 7576. take a look, 7576. Okay, once again, that's that rounding error of like 2.5, but this is the exact identical number to the one before, and that just shows there's no RNG, and also whatever number from your set is not really going to influence. Well, even if it's going to influence, it's so tiny that you can't even see it without any decimal points. Okay, and that once again just shows the consistency of this damage formula. Oops, sorry, I just done this wrong. But you can see here 3366 is actually going to be normal tag, and once again this rally actually went into a normal tag again. And if I show you guys a normal tag here, it is surprise 3366. So once again, we are able to replicate the damage formula exactly here. Okay. Now let me show you my second testing clip where I will be illustrating both the crit damage and also the multiplier in terms of your total stats, okay? So first of all, I have added one extra potential, so everything else is going to stay the same. However, I added one extra potential to my Gosh key, and this one's going to give me an extra 204 power attack, and also it's going to give me what do you call it, a strength of 5.44 if I just happen to actually do a crit damage. Okay, so this is going to be that. Everything else is going to stay the same. Now I'm actually going to jump to the end of the video first because that's where I'll have the non-crit. So first of all, if I actually do a block here, so let me just check. Yep, so I'll be using my ultimate from Gosh key. Now remember what we had before. So I just added in a potential which is going to give me an extra 204 power attack stats, okay? Remember what was the number we had before? Let me just double check. So the total stats I had before was 1683, okay? So what that basically means is my total stats now is actually going to be 1683 plus 204. Okay, so this is actually going to be my total power stat. And if we actually convert this to, let's say, a multiplier effect, because remember I added an extra raw stat of 204, and what that's going to mean is that it's like proportionally that is going to be extra 1.12 times extra on top of my original power stat. So if I actually take a look at how much my original ultimate have done, which was 7576, this would then be the number I'm expecting to get from my ultimate attack, because remember, my power stat has increased by the proportion of 1.12 now. So my power from my ultimate attack should also increase by the same proportion, assuming the formula is correct. And therefore, I should be expecting the number appearing now to be 8494. And now let's take a look. What's going to be number 8494, okay? Once again, number is absolutely spot on, and once again that just shows how accurate the damage formula is. So this is going to be what happens when it's not a crit. But now what happens if it's actually a crit, right? So I actually have a demonstration early on here, which let me see whether it's this one or not. Okay, no, that's a block kill, so it's probably this one. So I managed to do receive, and also take a look at this, okay? This is a perfect set, okay? And what's gonna be happening here? I will be doing an ultimate. Now let's try to guess what this number is, okay? So if you remember, I had an extra, in fact, I'll have to go back, I forgot the number now. What was my power strength stats? I had an extra strength of 5.44, okay? So remember, the base for strength is actually going to be 150. So if I actually do a critical hit, what I'm expecting to do is I will be timesing that by 1.50 544. Okay, so this will be my expected value if I actually do a critical hit on my ultimate. So I should be now seeing my attack to be 13203 when I actually do land a crit on my ult. And now if I jump back to where I was before, so this once again, remember, it's a perfect set, right? So all covered down perfect set, and what's gonna be the number? 13.2k. Okay, 13.2k. Check out my calculation. 13.2k. Okay, once again, it's absolutely spot on. Obviously, I don't know the actual decimal points here because it doesn't show, but I'm going to assume it's going to be 13203 again. Okay, so the damage formula is definitely correct here. And then I just want to show you another instance where it wasn't a perfect, and just to show you that's what I mean by perfect, normal, bad doesn't seem to have any influence on numbers. So here, once again, I done a set. The set, however, is actually now bad. However, as you can see, if you actually saw earlier, the number is still the same, okay, 2728. I will show you guys again, but remember 2728. And what's going to be my ultimate attack? Sorry, that went too far. I'm trying to... You guys probably saw it just tiny bit. 13.2k, okay? 13.2k. Once again, even though this is a bad rather than perfect, this number is exactly the same. And now let me just cross-check the value of the set as well. 2728 from my all color set. And I believe this was around 128. And yes, 2728 for my set as well, right? 2728 for the set. Okay, so this just proves whether it's a perfect or whether it's bad, has no influence on the number itself. So that's kind of what my hypothesis is, that the higher the number is going to increase the likelihood of the perfect or the bad for the normal action, but not the other way around. Okay. This is going to be the last testing clip I will show you guys, which is for testing attack technique. So basically, I'll put on potential for attack technique, but unfortunately, there's actually going to be a bit of extra power attack stat, which is actually fine because I will show you how the two the formula still holds when you have two factors all multiplying together and when there's a change in both of them. But basically, if we just take a look at the formula now, sorry, the total stats. So basically, because we add in that attack technique, my total stats now is going to be 1593, okay, and plus the one from the children's school, which is going to be 155. Okay, so if we just take a look at the two number now, it's going to be 1593 plus 155. Okay, so this is my new power attack stats. Now from previous testing, previously when I was testing without any potential, my power stats in total was actually 1683. So if I do a division, what I can see is that because of that extra power attack stats, it's actually going to be an extra 0.38 higher in terms of my power stats multiplier. Okay, the reason why it's this rather than the number you show on the potential is because the potential substats, the any proportion percentage you see there, is only going to be applying to the base stats. It's not actually going to be applying to anything like memory. Maybe I'll show that at the end of this video as well, just for completeness. But that's basically the reason why this is not actually the same percentage you will see from the potential. But anyway, what you can see here is that my new power attack stats in this testing clip is actually going to be 0.386% higher than the original. So now if I take the same incremental value and multiply that to my original automata in my very first clip, then what I am expecting to see here is that if I was keeping everything the same, my automata should be doing 7868. However, not everything is actually the same, because in this time, I also have an extra 15% attack technique. So I will be times this by an extra 1.15 as well. So now I actually get a number of 9048.88. So now if we actually take a look at my testing clip, hopefully I'll be able to show you fairly early on. It should be here. Nope, did I lose this point? No, I have returned it, which is good. So here I'll be doing Alt. Let's just take a look at the number. Once again, did you see that? 2728. The set is always the same, even though it's a bad. Take a look at this. 9048. That's the number here. What's the number in the calculation? 90. Well, technically it should be 9049 if I round it up. But once again, there's some kind of like small rounding issue. But you can see the number is almost like 99.99% there, right? And that's kind of why I say if you just want to calculate the number in the DMG formula, I think it's quite easy for you to replicate the number exactly the way it is. How this then translate to bad, normal, or perfect, that part I don't know. But just simply to replicate this number, you can definitely do this with almost 100% accuracy, okay? Just to round off the video on the point I just talked about, any substats you see in potential only apply to the base stats, okay? So if I take a look at my stats right now on my Kageyama, what you can see is that I have a quick attack of 407. You can see a set here, and there's a bonus, but I'm not actually putting on any potential. That extra 16 is purely from the deployment bond, sorry, not deployment bond, but character bond with other members of his school, okay? So that's kind of what everything else, you don't see a green number next to it, and the raw base stats is 407. Okay, so now what I'm going to show you guys is going to be actually quite simple. If I am going to put on a potential, I think I have one here. Let me just double check. This one, okay? So if I put on this, I'm only going to look at quick attack, okay? I'm going to add 7% here. Let's just take a look at what number this is actually going to give, okay? So I added 7% to this. What does that actually mean? That basically means I'm going to get an extra 28 stats, okay? And this is based on the base of 407. You guys can check this. It's quite easy. 4 times 7 equals 28, okay? So that's kind of what this 28 is coming from. However, well, I'm going to show you guys something else, which is I am actually now going to put on a memory, which is, let me just put on this one. This one has a nice round number, which is 250 quick attack. Okay, so if I put on this, obviously the stats is actually going to increase. So if the potential actually applies to everything, what I should be expecting to see is the proportion from the potential should actually make this go more than 28. However, if I actually take a look at the stats, what you can see, this is just 278, and that is basically made out of the 250 from the memory, right? Just like how the power attack is. However, the extra 28 is from the potential, which is exactly the same increase in potential we saw earlier if I do it without the memory, right? So once again, if I take off the memory, I'm just going to take it off here and take a look at stats. Okay, it's going to be 28. So regardless whether I put on memory or not, even though it's going to give me a huge amount of to my total stat, it's not going to change the substat for your potential. And that basically just shows any percentage in potential substats is only going to apply, well, main stats actually, that was a main stat, but those percentage ones are only going to be applied to the black number. Okay, so it's only going to be applied to the base stats. And this is also potentially something I saw a lot of people saying, is that you should always go for those percentage numbers rather than the absolute numbers. However, that is only going to be true if your base stats is actually going to be at least 1,200 or higher. However, if you actually take a look at vast majority of character in this game, at 5-star and SSR, it's only going to have a power attack. This is what you mean. It's only going to have it at 1077. So in those cases, if your is a SSR character, it's only 5-star or lower, raw power stats, raw substats is actually going to be better than percentage based one. However, this is actually going to change once you actually get them to 6-star. For example, my Tendo is at 6 stars, and then what you can see is, for example, my block now it's actually 1480. So now it's actually going to be slightly better with a percentage base rather than raw absolute stat, but this is only going to happen when you have an SSR at 6-star, and obviously it's going to be shine even more if it's a UR because they have a higher raw base stats, okay? But basically, let's say if your characters are not all 6 stars, and obviously you have a lot of SSR, it's actually going to be better to put on the raw absolute numbers rather than the percentage based ones for any SSR which are 5-star or lower, okay? Once again, I think a lot of people didn't realize this. They saw the percentage will be applying to the total stat, but actually no, it's just going to be the base stat of the character, and that's kind of what is only going to really be valuable for you to have those percentage ones once you actually get a character to 6-star, or if it's a UR character with a higher base stats, okay? But yeah, hopefully everything in this video was helpful to you guys. Not sure how many of you guys actually know this, because I definitely see a lot of people in the community make mistakes in terms of like which substats they want to concentrate on, etc. So hopefully this has been helpful.